subscribed if you are attending this meeting. You are welcome to leave and watch the video afterwards if that is preferred. Again, all of the participants, your cameras have been turned off, as well as your mics, although you are able to chat, raise your hand and react. Use your reaction buttons at the top of the Teams meeting. You also can manage your view there for if you would like to see the whole presentation or me talking. I'm hoping you choose the presentation, not me talking. Also, just if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat as well. So welcome to the 11th hour class. This part of the class is for our doula certification for HOC, which is Hospice of Cincinnati volunteers. I'm excited to share that we have now over 62 different volunteers in the meeting, in the cohort. So we're very, very excited for that. And always looking for more. So if you have anyone that you think would be interested in joining our doula cohort, we welcome them to volunteer and to learn more about becoming an end-of-life doula. Also, for those of you that are end-of-life doulas, if you have any expertise or advice that you would like to offer, I just ask you to put that in the chat so that we can add your knowledge base to the discussion. So just to begin with a centering moment of the 11th hour is really kind of an analogy to life. The 11th hour is our final chapter of our body, our spirit, our person being in presence in this world. And the 11th hour is also a sacred time where we're able to provide companionship and presence to people as they go about that journey. When we look at end of life, though, it's really beyond the moment of death. And we at Hospice of Cincinnati, we subscribe to the idea that it is kind of a phase rather than a moment. We have a goal of no one dies alone. However, dying alone is really someone feeling alone and not feeling well supported through that journey. And everyone gets to decide what that could be. Dying alone could be someone who's, before death, who's just worried about loneliness and social isolation. And that could be the moment that they need to have the greatest amount of presence and companionship. After death could be really important to them in making sure that, after they've died, that someone is there to share the news with their loved one in a compassionate presence. And so really want to focus on what is lost, not what is lost, but what is left, and equipping the family to support the journey. And I like to say our volunteers can often be a translator or a coach in this area. A lot of families may not have a deep death experience and are looking for guidance on how they can best support someone at end of life.
Lori, pardon the interruption. We
Yes.
can no longer see the PowerPoint display.
Oh, you cannot. Okay, well, let's see.
We see your lovely smiling picture, but unfortunately we cannot see the, we had the screen and then it seems to have gone away. Hold on. Ah, here we go. We are back in business, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Glad to hear we got that fixed. Thank you, Colleen. So the tasks of the dying, when we really think about, there's a lot of work that has to happen in terms of letting go. A lot of this is emotional, sort of releasing of past hurts, forgiving others, forgiving yourself, kind of a moving within and away. So sort of letting go of what used to be important to you and kind of focusing on what's next and sort of disconnecting. And so we like to use it, talk about it as a transitional time. that involves unbinding and letting go. This morning, one of our chaplains shared a country music song. I think it's by Tim McGraw, but it's the song, "Live Like You Were Dying." And the lyrics to that song say, I loved deeper and I talked sweeter and I gave forgiveness that I'd been denying. And really kind of when people are faced with that lessening of opportunities, that is sometimes what they do. They love deeper, they speak sweeter, they focus on what's important, and begin offering forgiveness, and that's good for everyone. And so in a way it can be a very sacred time of growth, which that word is kind of not usually associated with end of life, but it is a lot of spiritual and personal growth that can happen with people when they face that journey. So one thing to keep in mind is that HOC has a guide for caring, and this is provided to every volunteer at orientation, but it's also something that we can, and it's also provided at every hospice admission. I really encourage, if you're going to do Vigil or any volunteer visits, that you carry extra copies with you, and we can provide these. They're available in all of our locations. And when a patient enters the actively dying process, or we call that is within potentially 7 days, we will start to review this guide. And it's shorter snippets of and we ask the questions, what's your understanding of the signs and symptoms of impending death of your loved one? What are your fears and worries? And what are your goals and your priorities? So we are intentionally having those discussions with caregivers and with patients so that they are well prepared before unfamiliar things set in with them, and use that guide to direct those conversations. So some of the things that we look at with the end of life process is physical decline. And a lot of times this is associated or measured through pain. And the management of pain is, I would probably say, our greatest priority within Hospice of Cincinnati. That's not to say that everybody has pain at end of life. There are plenty of people that never need any pain management or pain medications. And so I don't treat it as an expectation if it's not there. And so we use ongoing assessments and adjustments. We use the term start low and go slow. So we always start with the lowest minimum dose to kind of manage the pain. Something that I think is a surprise for a lot of caregivers is that they will actually be providing the majority of the medication because it's considered routine medications. Patients, if they can be managed with regular doses of medications, and that's something that we teach them, and it's ongoing. They may have a pump. They could, mostly we try to switch to oral or sublingual meds, which go underneath the tongue. There's little syringes that, not syringes with needles, just little syringes that kind of drip the medication under the tongue, or you can do dissolvable oil pills. And what we mostly look for is, different from when you or I would go to our doctor and we say, okay, rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. A lot of our patients enter a phase where they can't communicate that. And so we have to look for some nonverbal signals. So we look for a furrowed brow. We look for a lot of restlessness, almost like they can't get comfortable in the bed. We look for kicking of the feet, and we do look for people kind of reaching out or grabbing, like if you're holding their hand, if they start to squeeze or grab your hand. And so those are some real nonverbal signals of maybe pain is not managed. And I will say that sometimes people, even medical professionals who haven't had a lot of experience with actively dying patients, will expect patients to profess pain. And so sometimes we need to point out that these may be symptoms of pain or unmanaged pain, and perhaps they need to consider if PRN meds are utilized. We keep, for every patient that is in a home, we actually provide what's called a comfort pack, which contains both pain and medications as well as medications for agitation. In the event that they arise, they are right there and they can be ready for people to utilize. So calling the support team in the middle of the night, they will get someone that will help to walk them through how to begin that process, or they can also call and get a visit for somebody to show them in person how to begin that. Physical decline. So this is sometimes one of the earliest signs that we see, is that patients have really no appetite, and they might prefer bland food. So we call this kind of bites and sips. If you hear that people are taking bites and sips, um, some of our dementia patients will actually prefer more sugary foods. And so we'll see people like they won't want to eat a whole meal. Maybe they'll want to take a couple sips of like a chocolate boost or a chocolate, something that they can easily digest. Milkshakes, they really tend to like milkshakes a lot. Loss of appetite is actually a physiological process where the body is trying to conserve energy, and digestion actually takes a lot of energy for the body. And so it's kind of saying, okay, we're going to conserve that energy for our heart and our kidneys and our consciousness and our breathing versus digestion. So we're going to go ahead and turn off that appetite control. Now, what's interesting about that is that we find this is hard for a lot of our families to accept, and they really struggle with this issue and want to continue, feeding someone that is potentially not having an appetite. And so the excess of fluid or food can actually lead to swelling. It can lead to additional congestion in their heart if they can't remove the water or the liquids very well. And it can also lead to a lot of constipation, which can be sometimes very painful, require enemas to be able to help release, which then leads to an issue of, back from diarrhea to constipation, diarrhea to constipation. So really just letting the appetite guide the person, the appetite and thirst guide the person is important. And when swallowing also becomes a deprioritized function. So aspiration is of great concern. Aspiration is when food enters the lungs and can cause choking, pneumonia, or even instant death. And so we really want to use things when people have swallowing difficulties like ice chips or mouth swabs to help them with their food and water intake. Also, we may see a lot of restlessness, so repetitive motions. We don't want people to ever be restrained. We want to focus on creating a relaxing environment, a calm atmosphere. Sometimes a back rub can be a little bit settling if they're able to tolerate touch. Stroking of the forehead is a really nice way to do that. Stroking of the arms, soothing music, reading aloud is a really great thing. And just, sometimes people get some anxiety and feel restless when there's a lot of people around the bedside. So you have to sort of monitor for, should we maybe take turns at the bedside? The other thing that it's beautiful that I'm really doing a lot of research on the impact of cuddling at end of life. There are these new beds that I would love for us to get that are being used in the UK and Australia. They're actually called cuddle beds, and they're an inflatable mattress that with our beds, like in our inpatient care center, you would lower it down to the ground and you would add this inflatable mattress to the bed, and it actually extends to like a queen size bed so that additional people, including, a spouse or a loved one, can get in to help hold and cuddle the person to help with their restlessness or their level of pain. Um, and I think it's just a beautiful thing. I mean, at home, we see our home care patients have benefits sometimes of that. They will move patients to, a couple's bed in the final hours and allow them the opportunity for that closeness. That's one of the reasons why people want to be at home. And so it'd be nice to be able to offer that experience in our inpatient care center as well. So hopefully we can get those, but I'm definitely on Team Cuddle for allowing that to happen. Other declines we see is in, physical declines is in urine. So urine color is actually a really great indicator of kidney failure. Also the number of outputs. It could be that it just completely stops. And so we're not changing people as frequently. Their color changes. It could become as dark as, honestly, it could become as dark as tea. Like if you think about a very dark tea, and that's related to, sometimes there's blood in the urine, sometimes it's a toxin buildup. And it can lead to a level, they have the toxin buildup in their kidneys, which can actually lead to a level of sleepiness that can be sort of like, they liken it to sort of a coma like. And again, this is your body's way of providing a peaceful death, is to create that level of sleepiness so that when you enter that sort of semi-comatose state, you're not aware of changes that may be experienced in breathing, and maybe your pain is not as acute, and you're really at this stage of just waiting for your heart to stop. Physical bowels. So constipation is something that we see a lot. It can be a real big side effect of pain medications. If you think about morphine and some of the other pain meds, that is part of what they do. To stop pain, they slow down the sensation of pain, and as a result, that slows down the activity of your smooth muscles, which includes your bowel. And so your bowel just does not innervate as much, doesn't contract to basically empty on a regular basis. And so we will start people on a regimen of Senecot daily, softeners, enemas, and then eventually move to what we call a physician's order, where bowels are not a priority. We're not really interested in having that person evacuate their bowels as long as the pain is being effectively managed. Sleeping, we will see an increase in sleepiness. It's really natural. Again, if you think about, your body is shutting down, and so your body's at war, and it's prioritizing, kind of your major functions in a priority order. And it's kind of it can be an exhausting experience. So people really need to kind of rest up. I like to liken it as, they're really resting up for their journey or for their transition. And so we want to allow people to kind of sleep when they want to sleep. And then at times when they're awake, we want to enjoy those moments. And many people can have moments of terminal lucidity, which can be just huge gifts to be present for. Breathing is one of the, I think one of the most distressing symptoms for our patients' families. And so we can do a lot to kind of demystify what they may what they may observe with breathing by sharing a few key facts. So the breathing centers and the pain are basically they're dying, and so those breathing centers are shutting down, and they become less effective. Breathing is something that we, unless we make an intentional awareness to take deep breaths, it's an automatic part of our body systems, and so when it starts to shut down, we see differences in breathing. So we may see some loud, deep sighing. So it could be kind of, we could see that. We could see some, their mouth may be moving, or their mouth may just be, honestly, may just be kept open wide. And we call that sort of an air hunger. They taking in less volume. They're actually, even though their mouth is open, they're not receiving as much air as because of their lung function. And it could be maybe a weaker gasping. The other thing that we see is that you have sort of this periods of apnea, which are periods of the time when they're not taking a breath can be very long, and periods of apnea could be, upwards of 30 to 40 seconds. I've seen them go as long as a minute, which when you're watching this, a minute is a very long period of time. The body can go without air for about 3 minutes. There's a rule of threes, if you haven't heard of it before, which is your body can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, liquids, and 3 minutes without breathing. And that's an ultimate limit. So apnea could be as long as a minute, and it feels like a very long period of time. And then often, the person will just start breathing again. It might be almost like a wake up gasp. What's really important to understand is that a lot of times the body has entered into an unconscious, we call it level of consciousness, may be at a level 4 or a level 3 at that point in time. And so level 1 is what we all would be. We can all have kind of this conversations. We can carry on some level of response, either through our vision, through eye contact, or through at least turning our head. A level 2 would be someone that's really only responsive when you try to get their attention. So maybe you have to tap them, maybe you have to kind of get their attention. And then a level 3 is where they're really only responsive to like a pinch, to where it's a pain or like a big, like a shake. We don't do that a lot of the time because we don't really want to wake them up. But what a level 3 indicates is that they're not really aware of their breathing pattern or some of the things that we are observing as sitting at the bedside. And almost everyone that reaches that level where they can't be raised without, a pinch or a significant stimulation is not going to be aware of their breathing declining or sensations. Now, their mouth can get very dry. And so we do encourage the continuation of mouth care, which is kind of just a wiping of the lips with a wet washcloth, or we have some specific sponges that are there. And that really does help to sometimes bring comfort, because, it can be, that sensation can be dry. And again, that's something that is hard to do, but we want to be very careful with the amount of liquid that we may interact with them. Physical, so their extremities can become very cool to the touch. And the reason for that is that, again, your body shutting down, it's bringing your blood to kind of the central organs. And so it's deprioritizing blood flow to your extremities. And People can kind of experience modeling. One of the ways, we talk about it is kind of dying from the toes up. So sometimes one of the things that I do as an end-of-life doula is I'll look at somebody's feet just to see how cool they are to the touch. Is there any change in their circulation? Um, they also may spike a fever. This happens quite a bit. And so giving them cool cloths or removing blankets or adding blankets, and just being aware of any modeling that they may, which is, we're going to go into kind of that, right? This is what modeling may look like, is it's sort of a speckled appearance on which indicates a loss of blood flow. You also can have cyanosis, which is a buildup of cyanide in the system, which can look like they have more bluish colored fingernails. So that's something also to be aware of as a skin change related to end of life. We also have what's called a near-death awareness. There's a great book, or if you want to podcast, if you want to look up a Dr. Christopher Kerr. He is a hospice palliative care physician working in an inpatient care hospice, and he's done a significant amount of research on people's end of life. We call them deathbed visions. With regard to visions, my personal experience has been is that a lot of people will talk about having visitors. And it doesn't appear, and his research has confirmed that this is distressing to people. So the idea is to kind of just ask them if they say somebody's in the room or who's that, or whatever, just ask them what they see, and ask them, what are they wearing? Do you recognize this person? Are they saying anything to you? And they will respond to that. Sometimes people will have what's called symbolic speech. Well, they'll talk about, I need to pack my bag. So that's a part of, wanting to get up and get ready, or, talking about the sea, or I've got my ticket. I'm, ready to go. It's amazing. People will, the one thing they do, I've had a patient before who was like, yeah, today's not the day, it's time tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, okay. And sure enough, for some reason, they have that otherworldly idea of when their time is to come. I'm going to pause there. Do we have any chat or questions or feedback at all from anybody? I know we've just got a few people on the line today. I think most people are going to watch a recording. If you do, just go ahead and add. Another thing that I would share is that what is our imminently dying process? So at Hospice of Cincinnati, our RN typically visits at least once. We try to do at least once a week in the home, sometimes usually 2 times a week, in the facilities, and they're going to identify hopefully somebody that is on the decline. If not, others, typically the caregivers may identify a decline and can report that in. As a volunteer, if you notice somebody's declining, we want you to note that in your volunteer report, because that may trigger us to go out and maybe do a visit a day earlier or 2 than planned. That way we can assess what our needs. But in an ideal state, we would identify somebody is declining within the 7 days of life. We would be looking at less and less water, less and less responsiveness, a greater scale on the level of consciousness, maybe a lack of desire, and maybe some terminal agitation. At that point, after the RN, she's going to do that visit, pull out that guide for caring, go over signs and symptoms of death with the family, prepare them for kind of what the next steps are. We're also going to have a social worker or chaplain make a contact during this time. And then we're going to proceed with what is called SIA visits. SIA visits stand for Service Intensity add-on. And Medicare basically will increase reimbursement for visits at the last 7 days of life, and really encourage us to see people on a daily basis the last 7 days of life. Now, that visit could be from a nurse or it could be from a social worker, but we're trying to send somebody every day to see them, the social worker, within the last 7 days. And then we go into the last 24 to 48 hours of life. We're assessing what additional supports the people need. Is there a need for vigil presence? Is the patient alone? Is there a need for, are people feeling well supported? What is their desire? And that is kind of an assessment that happens. We don't provide vigil or continuous care to every patient that is actively dying. Continuous care is really for people who have unresolved symptoms. They don't have pain that's managed. They have maybe a congestion in their chest that is problematic, and they really need that nurse at the bedside to manage symptoms. And once those symptoms are managed, that nurse is going to leave the bedside, and then that's when, if vigil presence is requested, we provide that vigil presence with the use of both volunteers and team members as available. We do not have currently paid team members that just sit vigil. So vigil is not necessarily the highest priority for our RN and our nursing assistant team, because they have to go to people that are symptomatic first. So that's why we greatly appreciate our vigil volunteers and our doulas, because if the need is just presence for vigil, then if the volunteer is able to go, then that allows us to send, a nurse, an aide, to a higher priority, to somebody who is potentially with unresolved symptoms. And so we really greatly appreciate that help, and we just cannot say enough about it. And we appreciate your flexibility and adaptability to that. So what goes into that identification and assessment? It's not a crystal ball. That's why I did this. We don't have a crystal ball, but we do have our experience and some key metrics that we look at in terms of assessing that closeness to death. And this is like the number one question we get from our patients' families. Well, when is it going to be? Well, what's the timing? We do the best to convey that, but knowing that we're not in control of the timeline. And so all we can do is share our observations and what we think will likely happen, but also modify it with, we don't know for sure. So we're going to look at people who their blood pressure is dropping. They're having increased or longer periods of apnea. They have increased secretions, and we're talking about, lung and mucus secretions, that they are sounding more congested and maybe even potentially going into sort of a death rattle where they can't clear the mucus in their throat because their swallowing functions have shut down and they need, and so they're not able to do that. Where their respirations are less than 8 per minute, when their oxygen, their pulse oxygen monitor, which is this is the thing that everybody puts their finger in when they go into their primary care doctor, and it's usually around like 98 to 99% pulse ox. This would be around, less than 90%. It would really be considered that person's not getting enough oxygen to meet the needs of their brain. The other thing is that their LOC, we talked about, that's their level of consciousness, is that a 3 or a 4. They can't be, you can't get a reaction out of them without pinching, or you just can't get one at all. Even when you pinch them, they don't even respond. They don't move, they don't respond at all. Their pulse can be very thin, just not sound very strong, and it could also be very fast, a very fast pulse, up to about 100 120 beats per minute. They're not having any output of urine, and they haven't had a bowel movement. Sometimes people can go without a bowel movement for 7+ days and no urine output for 3 days. And again, they may be spiking a temperature, or their temperature could be very low. People who are not in the vigil stage are people who have stable vitals, certainly people who are talking or responsive, and people who are eating or drinking. So if you are assigned to go to a vigil and the patient starts to do these things, we would like for you to kind of let us know about that right away, because that patient is probably not actively dying. And that's when the vigils go on for 5 to 7 days, is because they're not really in the last 24 to 48 hours of life. Maybe they've had, and what can happen is, it's not that somebody purposely made a mistake or anything like that. What can happen a lot is sometimes people can have TIAs, or they can have little mini strokes towards end of life that can look, or even mini heart attacks that can look like that they're actively dying, and then they can recover from that. And so maybe what we thought was they were starting the decline process was actually, a TIA or a mini heart attack, and they ended up recovering from that since the time that vigil was requested. And now we had one patient who I remember, she sat up and asked for a Pepsi, and it's like, okay, I don't think she's a vigil anymore. So we sent the nurse out, and we discontinued that. We talked a lot about the SIA visits, so I'm not going to go into that a little bit more, but just, this is when we're doing the education, and we're really working with the last 7 days of life. And there is additional financing for us to provide those visits and billing from Medicare. So with regard to the 11th hour options, we have continuous care. This is really provided in the home or long-term care, and that is where a nurse would go and visit them for unresolved symptoms. It's typically a nurse or a license, an LPN, and could be intermittent. It could be that maybe we're working on medications. We give someone a new medication. They seem settled. We return, we give it 4 hours, and then we return later to do an additional increase. We could also have patients that are moved to an acute stay in the inpatient care center. And again, this is for unresolved symptoms, and it's typically a 3 to 5 day stay. Medicare expects us, and the majority of patients can have their symptoms managed within 3 to 5 days. And then there's the bedside presence, where the symptoms are managed, and where the family, the social worker, the chaplain, the doula, or the vigil volunteer is offering that presence. So going into how do we provide presence, looking at, there is really no typical death. Each person dies in their own way, in their own time, with their own culture, with their oんbelief system, and with their own unique relationships. And I like to say that they kind of die with their own story. And so I especially like to talk to our new volunteers, because many of them, it has been an experience that has led to it. And if they're willing to share their experience, I think it's helpful for us to understand the diversity of experiences with end of life that can happen. So the role of our 11th hour volunteer is really, I like to call it a vigil companion role, because you're not doing as much as you are just really being, and you're really being a calm and compassionate healing presence, and you're there to be present emotionally and physically. You're providing companionship for the dying, but a lot of times it may not be the person dying that needs you. It might be the facility team that has loved and cared for this person in their retirement community for 3 years. And now they are experiencing the loss of that person. It could be the family. It could be the friends that come to visit. It could be just a general, new people in the nursing home. We've had post-COVID, we've had a lot of influx of new caregiver, new healthcare workers into the healthcare field. A lot of them have been trained with online training. The problem with online training is that you don't get that dialogue and you don't get somebody. They may never have seen somebody actually die before. And this may be very fearful for them. And so being able to be there to help support them can be a huge service. We always want to avoid questioning and judgments. And you're also to be a representative of Hospice of Cincinnati, and then also to just observe and escalate concerns to the care team if things are not going as planned, or if there just seems to be a lot of misinformation, miscommunication, that additional supports are needed. So this kind of goes to who are you serving? And you're really serving all four of these. So the patient is always at the center, but you're also serving the family and the facility, and then you're also serving our HOC team. So you are helping to provide support so that the team can go to where the greatest need is, so that they can work at the top of their licensure to meet the needs. I heard this statistic yesterday, and I want to share this with you. We have for a long time wanted more and more people to go to hospice care. The good news is that I think that it's becoming part of we have increased utilization of hospice care like never before. And it's a good thing. I think the message has gotten out there. We expect a 43% increase in hospice care over the next 4 years. 43%. So Hospice of Cincinnati is preparing to have a doubling of our census, which today, every day this week, we have reached a new record of people enrolling in our program. Today, we crossed that 900 person threshold. We are at 907 patients that we are caring for every single day. And that is more patients than the Bethesda North Hospital and the Good Samaritan Hospital combined. And they get to care for them in one location. Our patients are spread all over, right? So the team has to go out, and we're in partnership with other people in delivering the care. So we have to work with either training the caregivers or training the facility team. It's a very complex process, very valuable, but it takes everyone on the team. And volunteers, you have that critical role of allowing our team members to be where they're most needed. As our census is rising, you are helping to fill in where you can serve so that they can serve at the top of their licensure. And that is just so, so critical. We have an 11th hour training sheet that we provide that I encourage you to carry with you on vigils, along with the guide to caring, because there's just a lot of anxiety and uncertainty on how can I best support my loved one. And so this is what we put together to be able to share. Here are some things to consider. It's not a do and do not. It's just some ideas for how to serve in this particular time for regular people who want to support their loved one. And we have copies of these sheets. It's kind of our vigil volunteers should be their #1 teaching tool. So in supporting the patient, you always want to introduce yourself both to the family, the facility team, and to the patient. You want to make sure that we say 3 in and 3 out. So if you're serving in a facility, you want to introduce yourself to all 3 people, to the front desk person, to the person at the nursing desk, and to the person caring for the patient. You also want to look at the environment to maybe consider how can we create levels of calmness. That could be playing soft music. It could be holding silence. You could be lowering the blinds or softening the lights. Some of this is going to be, is the person in a private room? Are they sharing a room with somebody? And so I'm just ask you to read the room and use your emotional intelligence for how to navigate perhaps getting that environment set. One, I recommend, it's not, again, it's not a requirement, but I think that people taking turns at the bedside is a good thing. It allows everybody a break. It allows everybody some private time. And it also allows you to continue so that, you know, you can potentially have lots of people cover for 24/7. This is the number one thing that I think we use as a missed opportunity with families is to say maybe, hey, you could take some shifts. So maybe you could be here now and somebody else could be here later while you take a break. Um, if they don't choose to do that, they want to all be together, then by all means allow them to do that. But it could be a suggestion we make. Want to put your cell phones on vibrate. And then also I recommend, I call them solitude breaks. There's a good amount of research that about 60% of people pass when nobody's in the room. Um, we have just, this was kind of a staggering statistic for me, we have about 14 patients that pass at Hospice of Cincinnati on a daily basis. And the majority of those cases, they're not witnessed. And it's not because it's a failure on our part, it's because either the person passed in their sleep in the middle of the night and we you know they were sleeping and we didn't know that they were in their 11th hour, we didn't know that they were that close, or they passed because the person stepped out of the room to go to the bathroom or to take a break and they chose that time to be without that presence. So we really need to see presence as it's being there the way that they want through that entire 24. It's not about being there to moment the witness, you know, the moment of passing. It's about supporting them through that journey. Um, and sharing with caregivers. I cannot tell you how many people I talk to who they have deep held grief and regret that they weren't there in that moment. And we have the opportunity to go ahead and prepare them that that's not a failure. And don't, if that doesn't happen, that's because your loved one was giving you one last gift. They didn't want to let you down and they chose that moment because they didn't want you to be burdened with that or, you know, and so we need to really make those messages. Mouth care is important. Cool cloths can be important. Um, Placing some little pillows at the joints because those tend to be pressure areas. You actually want to avoid the left, having people be on their left side. Volunteers don't position people, but they, you know, sometimes our nursing, they're not aware of the left side versus the right side. The left side actually puts more stress on the heart. And because of the gravity and the weight. So the right side actually helps more with clearing because the heart is able to pump the blood through the lungs a little bit better, helps with clearing congestion. Can do some gentle shoulder stroking. So I use, as part of my energy work, I use kind of just the weight of your hand. You don't need to massage, just the weight of your hand on the shoulder, just kind of going very slowly and just sort of rubbing down the hand all the way to the hand and out the fingers, just very slowly with just the weight of your hand. Can be very good. It helps to release any lactic acid that may be holding tension in the body. You can also do the same thing with the knees down to the feet. I don't usually recommend that volunteers touch more than the feet, or if you're doing it, you teach it to the caregivers that may be in the room for them to provide that. But again, it just helps to release some of the lactic acid and tension that the person may be holding. Now, if you're touching them and they tend to get restless or they're moving, then guess what? That's a signal that they're not appreciating that. So you want to remove that stimulation. Hand holding. The majority of people like to have their hand held. Again, if they're moving their hand, they probably will not grasp your hand if their level of consciousness is not high, or the scale is high in their hand. But if they start to move your hand or tend to grip your hand, that might be something that is comforting to them. If they start moving their elbow, they may be trying to remove their hand from being held. Reading and prayers consistent with the patient's religion are certainly important. Guided imagery. I'm a really big fan of guided imagery. I think that, just sitting and talking about, taking, breaths, but, realizing that they may not be in control of their breaths, but talking about kind of walking through a forest, maybe sitting on a beach, sensing the warmth of sunshine on your body. All of those things can be very relaxing. The waves of the ocean. I think, that can all be very a breeze. Sometimes cracking a window if it's a nice day, just to let a little bit of fresh air in, and just to talk about the sensation of that fresh air. It's kind of funny. My husband always thinks I'm weird when I say the smell of the air. Air has a smell to me, and I think that it's very relaxing. In so doing that, I use a little bit of reflexology on the feet when I do a foot massage. Unless you know how to do that, I've been trained how to do that. I don't know that you need to do it, but if you would be interested, I'd be happy to show you sometime. And then also Reiki and healing touch. If you are a practitioner, it's good to go ahead and utilize that as a way to help with the unbinding. Okay. Still
Lori, I'm
no
sorry to interrupt
questions? Yeah.
again. At some point we lost our PowerPoint slide again.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and pull that up. Let me pull it up. I don't know. Let's share again. I don't know if maybe it just stopped sharing after a while. How about now? Do you have it?
We do again. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, great. Excellent. So our HOC website has all of the training that we use for our caregivers is also the training that we use for doulas. And that is intentional because we want you to be able to share the same training with the caregivers to reinforce it. So you can get printouts of these training sheets from Lauren Abbey in our office. We can mail a copy of each of them to you if you want to request it. Just email hocvolunteers@trihealth.com. We also have them, they can be in PDF version, or you can just use this QR code and access all of them via our website. And there's one for each, and they're pretty detailed. So the breathing changes is one, mouth care is another one, the morphine going low and go slow, condom catheters, that was something that honestly, when I had my dad, I was really struggling with. And it gives a great explanation, great training tool. Delirium, the food and drink, the skin breakdown, the terminal agitation, and then just really kind of bedbound patients, how to roll, how to change them, how to support your own back. Those are all how to prop someone up. They are all very useful educations that just go a little bit deeper than our guide for caring. So I encourage you to be familiar with those. A lot of our doula tests, if you're planning to take the exam, will reference these training sheets. So make sure that you have reviewed these. The exam is an open book test. So it's a good thing to get those and have them available. So when we're supporting family members, I think it's just remember that this is a delicate, very delicate balance between providing the support that they need and the training, the information that they need without sort of turning them off because you're giving them information they don't want to hear, right? And so just being very careful in the way that those messages are delivered. And what I like to say is, conveying compassion is really about meeting people where they are rather than trying to move them to where you think they need to be. We don't want to try to move people towards acceptance until they're really ready and for acceptance. So one of the things just to ask questions, if they bring up things like breathing, you could ask the question, what is your understanding? And ask them to share that. So that way you sort of get a baseline for their at, and what are your concerns? And what I would say is that we need to be very careful of those kind of definitive words. So we don't want to use definitive. We want to kind of use those words that are like sometimes. We want to avoid words like always. We may use the word typically and then preface it, but everyone is different. Every journey is different. So just to kind of softly balance those concerns. You would be surprised. I have sat with people who have, I've told them about taking the breaks, and they're like, Lori told us never never hold our loved one's hand. I'm like, that's not at all what I said. What I said is, that it may be beneficial to take breaks and to let go, give your loved one kind of a sensory break. It's not an absolute. If that's not what you want to do, then by all means, it's your loved one. You support them in the way that you want to support them. It's just information and, kind of from my experience, what I would recommend. But it's yours to take or leave. All of this is learning to take or leave, that you don't, if you're not ready for it, you don't want to employ it, don't employ it. There's no problems with that. And just understand that denial is a perfectly good coping mechanism for a lot of people. And if they want to believe that way, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do to change their minds. And we see this a lot, honestly, when it comes to pain medication. We have a lot of families who may come into the unit and believe that we are over medicating and killing their loved one, because they're no longer talking and they're no longer waking up, and that is not what's happening. But their denial is that their loved one is passing, and they don't, and their body is shutting down, and maybe they're just not ready to understand that, and they're looking for a place to place responsibility, and that's okay. Acceptance is an individual journey. But no matter what their concerns are, we can always make a promise to follow up and to escalate their concerns. Because our goal with everyone that we care for within Tri-Health is that they're seen, they're heard, and the Tri-Health is be healed. I like to say it's be seen, be heard, and be held, because we hold people, the patient and the family, in our care emotionally, physically, spiritually. They are under our, in our and we're holding them through some of the most fragile times of their life, and we've got to be very careful with them, and all of the emotions that come along with that. So, and everybody usually does just a wonderful job of that. Spirituality, we had a previous class that was on spirituality, and we have some resources on the specific um, practices and approaches of cultures and religions around death and dying. And so that guide is available to you, and I would encourage you to reference that as well. And ultimately, I will say that you can't make assumptions. You can't even make assumptions if someone's, religious says Christian or religious says Catholic, or, religion says we don't know what their journey within that religion has been, until we really get an opportunity to hear it from them, or to get a full information from their family member. And so it's just sort of a framework that we're operating with. And so we want to let our patients guide their work. And really, your agenda has no place. You can kind of be reflective and actively wonder, and just let the patient follow and let them take lead, and just kind of stay neutral. And that's just a part of sort of reading the room, and understanding what their goals are, and really validating that. In terms of supporting the facility staff, again, this may be their very first death experience. And so we want that to invite them to share stories of the patient. We can actively listen. We need to complement their care. I will say there is a lot of stuff, even me, that I look at, I'm like, oh gosh, I really wish, but ultimately that staff member, they showed up today to potentially care for, in our nursing homes, a nurse may have 30 patients at the same time, and nurses aide may have 15 patients at the same time, and they've showed up today to provide that care. And so while the care may not be what we would give high marks for, we still need to compliment them for what they are doing, and the fact that they're actively trying to improve. And by virtue of complimenting their care and saying things like, I see that you really care for your loved one, or your patients. I see that, your manner with them is just really empathetic, is going to give them that boost to want to continue that journey. And so we want to maybe enlist their partnership in things like medication management. Rather than being inquisitive or challenging, we want to say things like, questions, open-ended questions like, how do you think they're managing their pain right now? And get from their perspective what barriers they may have. Like maybe they're saying, maybe their thing is, well, I don't know, they look comfortable to me and they're not asking for any pain medicine, and it's not scheduled for another 4 hours yet, so I can't give it. That may be a very legitimate response to them. And say, you may be able to say, well, I'm seeing a furrowing of the brow and they're kind of fidgeting, and, they are at this reduced level of consciousness. They may not be able to ask for the medication. Do you think that maybe that PRN, do they have PRN meds? Have you considered or evaluated them for that? And that might be something just to encourage them to express. And maybe just by having that additional observation, they'll be like, oh yeah, maybe that is the case, and, and be able to do it. You also want to make sure that you're expressing gratitude, and that you're, managing the team up to the families, so if a family member comes in and says, oh, here, whatever, say, that the team just came in to check on him. It seems like they've been well loved. They've lived here in this community. I observe these interactions. I think that is always important to point out the things that people are doing to give good care, and everybody's doing something at some level. In terms of our Vigil volunteers and signing up, we operate currently on Sign Up Genius, and we have an active Vigil sign up that anybody that has is in the shadowing process or has become active can sign up for. Every person with this sign up, it's going to include who is the coordinator on call. So we take a rotation. Currently that's weekly from 8 a.m. to work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. This week it's Stacy Elliott, and it will have her phone number on there. And then we always list the HOC support team. Anything regarding a patient need, you can reach out directly to that 246-9137 number, and that's going to get you immediately to a triage nurse. We also have a link to our patient visit documentation. So immediately following a visit, and this is really important, you need to submit this immediately following the visit. We need to get the report of how your visit went if there are any particular concerns. We recently combined our pre-scheduling and our active vigil. So now there are slots where you can pre-schedule your availability and the regions that you are willing to attend. Here you can see for on Monday, we've got Linda Reed, who wrote down that she is available from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. for West or Central Vigil. And that's incredibly helpful for our team when we know that people are willing to serve in that area. We may be shifting the way that we do our vigil scheduling in the coming months, where in the past we've focused sometimes even on overnight and late night hours. And honestly, we really want to move away from that because our vigil volunteers really prefer to serve during the daytime hours. Some prefer to serve on evenings, but we want to schedule you for the time that you are willing to provide, and don't want to really make you feel like it's a commitment above that or an ask above that. So our goal would be just to get as many people pre-scheduled or who say, hey, I have availability and I will hold this time in my calendar, send me somewhere. Because like I said, we have 14 actively, 14 patients who die every day. Certainly somebody would be able to benefit from a vigil volunteer. And so there's a work group that's actually I'm meeting with after this meeting to discuss how we can improve that process. So if you have any feedback for me, I would love to take it directly to that work group and add it to the feedback I've gotten from other vigil volunteers. Okay, that looks like there's a message in the chat. I'm just going to pull that up real quick. Excellent refresher, Kevin said. Thank you, Kevin. You're always best. We do send out alerts currently, and they come. This is an example. It'll say like we have West Vigil at Harrison Trails. That's the name of the community, and we will list the time that it's needed. And then there's a link directly to the sign up, and then typically there is the number from the coordinator that if you want to call and say, hey, I can't help tonight, but if they're still around, I'm happy to help tomorrow or something like that. We love those calls. All of the texts come from this number, and you have to opt into this. So what I would recommend doing is adding this contact number after you have opted in and just naming it in your contacts as HOC Vigil. You can turn off notifications yourself on your cell phone once you've added it as a contact, so that if you're going on vacation, turn off those notifications. Go on vacation. You don't need to hear about our vigils until you get back, and then turn on the notifications again when you return. So that's really up to you what you want to do. Once you sign up for an assignment, you will get what's called a PHI secure email from our vigil coordinator, which will include should include a patient face sheet, but it'll include the name of the patient, the date of birth, their location. You should get a general diagnosis, typically like Alzheimer's, COPD, heart failure. You will get a religious thing, a religion if we have it. You will also get the family info, the spouse's number, the volunteer coordinator's number, and then you should get a little bit of a note. And if we don't, sometimes we don't have notes, to be honest with you. Sometimes people are in our program for a very short period of time and we just don't get a lot of information. So we do our best to collect that. And the information on this one was like, Mickey is asking for support. So Mickey is the spouse. He is alone in supporting his wife. Patient is comfortable and unresponsive, labored breathing and periods of apnea. So that's a pretty typical vigil for you. Okay. So in the event that you need to call our triage number, in the event, don't call our coordinator first. Call the and don't call 911. Call HOC, the triage RN. They're going to be the ones that are going to be able to help and direct you. So you want to call in the event death occurs. If you see symptoms are unmanaged, or somebody is reporting to you symptoms are unmanaged, we want to do that. And you're going to just share what you're seeing and viewing, and then also because we are not, as coordinators, we are not available 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So if you're serving during this time, you really need to give a status update to the support team. So you could just be like, hey, I'm leaving my vigil. Patient, there's nobody coming after me. Patient is resting. I've talked to the facility nurse. Family is asking if there'll be anybody to do an additional visit tonight. Want to make sure that you have the latest and greatest information. And that's really, really critical for us to get those updates overnight. And then if death occurs, first, you want to tell the facility team if you believe the patient has passed. Again, you know, those periods of apnea can be like a minute or longer. So, and then immediately after you want to call, and both of these numbers are okay. Personally, I just remember the 891-7700 number and push option 1. But this is the direct line back, 246-9137, that goes to support team. You want to defer to their instructions. Typically, we want you to stay with the patient. Now, that could be definitely to the end of your shift, or to an HOC team member arrives. Sometimes the facility will tell you that it's okay to leave. You know, we really would prefer you stay with the patient until HOC arrives to pronounce the death or the end of your existing shift. Because what can happen, and here's the reason for that, the facility might be okay, that the patient's died, they're going to leave the patient in the room alone. But the facility is going to call the family, or HOC is going to call the family, and they're going to rush in. And that family is going to see that that patient was alone, and that's going to cause them a lot of trauma. And so we want to make sure that somebody is there if the family is going to arrive that can give them the support that they need in seeing the patient dead and potentially seeing the patient alone. Also, it's a great time to be able to convey, if you were there for the moment of death, to say, you know, to tell them that, you know, the patient was comfortable, that you were with them, and that HOC team is on their way, and just to help them with their grief, you know. So it's really kind of a critical thing. And you also want to contact the vigil coordinator on call, because we could have another person coming after you that we need to call off. And so a lot of our volunteers, we ask that you, in that sign up Genius, that you put the comments and the name that your phone number. That way, if we do have a call, if even the, you can call off or communicate with the next volunteer if there's a delay. Okay, I'm going to pause for a sec. Here we go. Here's a great question. Nancy Cook asked, understanding that each client is unique, what is the general guideline in a long-term care vigil setting for how long to wait after breathing has stopped before notifying staff? 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or longer? Additionally, I would say that it would be at least the 3 minutes mark. I would wait 3 minutes. Depending upon if the facility staff is an aide or is a nurse, a registered nurse, because only registered nurses can pronounce death. They're going to come in and they may listen to the heart. And I believe that they have to listen to the heart not beating. I believe it is for an entire minute before they can pronounce death. So I would wait for 3 minutes for breathing to stop. Sometimes breathing can get really shallow, like you could even put your finger right here on the hollow of their neck to just even sense if you see any movement, or you can do pulse, radial pulse. But typically this is a great way to determine if there's any breath coming in or out. Additionally, what is the general recommendation for how long to remain with the client after death and after staff have been notified and begun to tend to the client? Okay, Nancy, there we go. We got that question. Yeah. And I hope that that's helpful to everyone as to understand that. Okay. If there's any additional questions, want to go ahead, or comments, I want you to go ahead and put those in the chat. I just want to leave you with that this is honestly, out of all the volunteer work we do, this is kind of the most sacred. And it's not an expectation that every volunteer does vigil. However, I will share that I think that every person should, at some point in their journey, attempt to do a vigil, because it's maybe not it's a lot more relaxing and peaceful than they perhaps think it is. And it's just a huge benefit to the patient, the family, and to our team, that even if you did it with somebody else, it can help to maybe increase your comfort level with death. I will say that I mean, there are so many times I could say that there are probably, in the 8 years that I have done this work, I think that a patient has died with a volunteer as the only person in the room. I would say it's probably been less than 50 times. It's not a frequent occurrence that someone dies when the volunteer is in the room. And we've done a lot of vigils with 14 patients passing away, and then vigils assigned to it. That is each day. That is not a lot of frequency. So if that is what people are afraid of, is that, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would do if they died alone. It's just such an infrequent thing. I would just encourage people to give it a try, because I love this quote from Mother Teresa, that no one should die alone. Every human should die with the sight of a loving face. And that is not just the moment of death, it's the journey. And we never know when a person is going to be, maybe when they're going to have that moment of terminal lucidity, or are they sensing you holding their hand? Are they sensing your presence in the room? Are you going to help them to play that music and to relax? What are we doing even before the moment of death or after the moment of death that is going to be so impactful to them or to the family? And so it's a good reminder of the sacredness of this work. I'm going to go ahead and turn off or allow the chat, you guys, the controls. I'm going to stop the recording and allow you an opportunity to kind of just connect and record and